The commonest trap that I've seen in cases is to have two ideas, but to leave them so general that they can't actually guide you to action, and that you can't see what could go wrong with them. Of course, none of us feel that any idea we come up with could possibly go wrong, but life teaches a different lesson. and being smart has to do with figuring out that, some of the ways they could and having a plan B. Some of the plans I see that are better are ones that do a kind of if-then reasoning. I'll make this move. If this, then this, and if that, then that. It's complicated.
Yep.
It's another advanced form.
Okay.
But it seems like that's how we get responsive. We do start to contemplate the different avenues, right, on which we can move. If I say in my class, that's a plausible hypothesis, tell me another one, then I can start to learn what those avenues. And so if this, then maybe I'll ask this, and if that, maybe I'll suggest this. So it's just kind of branching if-then thinking. It's very sophisticated, but I think people are to try to produce it in these cases because it can be so useful to them.
Yeah.
Well, we've asked the interns to incorporate their deliberations in the planning of a unit. And I think this is sort of tricky, and in a way it's also different from what we asked in the first case. Could you talk a little bit about how that might look?
We assumed that when we designed the assignment, we necessarily assumed that the interns would, as a matter of habit, be planning units of instruction running 2, 3, 4 weeks. In which they've worked out, with the help of their 80204 instructors or field instructors or mentor teachers, sort of what that unit's supposed to accomplish. What this assignment does is sort of lay a track in there of concern for particular kids. And that's not new, right? People have been talking with the interns all along about paying particular attention to students' particular need. That's not new. The thing, we're just trying to provide a lot of space for that, support for that in the 803 class. So we assumed that whatever's already going on. Now, where in a unit plan would you expect them to start to see some of the yield of this project? Partly in adaptations, right?
Yep.
Differentiation
Yep.
of curriculum?
Maybe even in the way you conceive of your objectives. You start thinking that there's going to be that there's going to be this range of what I can achieve, and I'm going to try to both challenge, right, some of the students, and I'm going to try to extend and pull for the others. So you're already starting to think that way about a unit as a whole, and this assignment lets you tie into that. So you just examine the unit from the standpoint of how it works out for those chosen students. There's I think nothing new. They have some kind of game plan they already use, some habit they already use for unit planning. We're just trying to tie into that.
So they're not designing a particular unit for this assignment. They are designing units anyway, and then are looking at the unit and its pieces with an eye toward the specific needs they've developed, the things they've thought about regarding these couple students.
We're assuming you're not just saying read chapter 3 and
answer the
questions at the end, but you're bringing some intelligence to the teaching of that text.
So let's offer some examples of moves. For instance, okay, so maybe you have to think of, if everybody has to read the chapter, you might think of some different ways to get through the reading of the chapter based on the needs of particular students.
One of the kids you picked because she's on the special ed caseload. The diagnosis is learning disabilities, and the key thing you've learned from talking to the special ed teacher is the idea of more processing time. That it takes her longer to process things than other people do. So while other people are processing at a certain rate, she's sort of behind them because she's not going as fast. All right. And so then now you're starting to think about how I'm going to teach this chapter. And I know I've got somebody who processes text slower than the others. And so now I'm where you are, right? That's where you wanted to take us. I'm just giving a concrete example. So what do?
So I want to push this in a slightly different direction, but from the perspective not necessarily of reading or something like that, but what if in the situation you're a phys ed teacher and you have particular skills that you're working on with students, and you say, I want students to be able to do X, and I've got students in the classroom who, for whatever reason, I know or I assume or I have good reason to believe that X is not going to be easily attainable, if attainable at all.
Mhm.
So in that situation, what do you do? You've deliberated and you've decided, I'm going to try to find some way in my planning to account for this student in my classroom and to teach them better as I'm working with all these other students. If I've got a skill that I'm working on and I've got students that are, just having a really rough time with it, what might I do? And I know that's
Or, a student who's not going to be able to do a pull-up, for instance, because of, or somebody who's not going to be able to run the shuttle run because they're in a wheelchair. Or,
Yeah, yeah.
So
if you're thinking about how to teach the chapter or how to teach the skill, what this assignment asks you to do is to consider that kid, what's likely to happen, right? As that unfolds, what you're going to do about it, right? Whether it's an alternative form of activity,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's some kind of extension, some kind of differentiation. I'm assuming that the interns have learned things that are relevant to this.
Mm-hmm.
That this is not entirely new territory.
Sure.
That if they treat these as practical problems, this kid presents me with this practical problem. And so in some ways it's good to think about wheelchair and learning dis. One of them is very visible, right? It's very concrete, it's all very physical. The learning disability is kind of hidden, not kind of very obvious, but both of them require some kind of accommodation. But both of them give you a practical problem. How and when can I give the learning disabled kid more processing time? Or more support for processing? And how do I give the kid in a wheelchair an alternative way to, I was just watching jump rope yesterday. What would you do with a kid in a wheelchair when what we're doing is we're jumping rope this week? It strikes me that there might be some kids in wheelchairs who could win foot races if you just include them. It depends on the rest of the condition, right? What is the condition that has them in the wheelchair?
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
That's right.
That's true.
These are practical problems to which we can't lay out, just any easy kind of answer.
Yeah.
We're just assuming that the interns are in advance thinking through how they will teach what they're out there to teach, and as they do that, then this project calls for being more alert and attentive to these two kids, the interpretations about them, and what could be done.
Well, we would end, obviously, this with a section on a further description, talking about kind of evaluation. This is what happened. This is how it played out.
We're back to description.
We're back to description.
Back to data, right?
Yep.
We don't want to fool ourselves about our intervention any more than we wanted to fool ourselves about the situation. We're back to describing. And then, in many ways, back to interpretation. And the question, how'd it go, is first a question of interpretation. If my hypothesis had been that I haven't yet learned to pay attention to this young person, and so she's being neglected in my class, then the assessment has partly to do with whether that dynamic has changed. In what way has that dynamic changed? In what way, right, is she now within my attention, and am I paying attention to her? And so I can get back to an assessment. The moves are similar, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably we ought to remind that saying that you do a case is not saying that you have to make a successful intervention. It's not saying you have to succeed with the kid. You could learn a lot from succeeding or failing, or partly succeeding and partly failing.
Or
Key
entering
thing-
into the ongoing process.
Yep. The key thing is just not to fool yourself. You can't meet your responsibilities to kids by fooling yourself.